Okay, so I have hit record. We are now not quite live, but we are recording. And thank you very much for talking with me. So, for those that don't know, I am Lindsay. I'm founder of A Different Human Design. And this lovely lady that has agreed to chat with me is Leanne. You're studying for a PhD. Have you achieved the PhD? Where are you at with your study?
I have a bachelor's in psychology, a master's in developmental disorders, and I'm currently studying my PhD.
Oh, bravo. And this is why we've got your expertise on here to talk to us. So we met many, many years ago when I was tutoring and mentoring and came along to your household to support you with one of your sons. And would you say that that is where your interest in autism kind of sprung from because it's close to home? Is that right?
I think it was a combination of things. I think it was parents are experts in autism because the minute you get that diagnosis, there is no support. So your nose is in the internet, your nose is in books. You just want to absorb as much information as possible.
Yeah.
And then there was a particular meeting where an educational psychologist sat me down and said, I am the expert. You are only a parent. You do not know what you're talking
Oh
about.
my
And
God.
you will listen to me. And I said, watch,
Yeah,
watch
watch
this
this space.
space.
Yeah.
So I went to university with the view of becoming an educational psychologist. I got partway through my degree and realised actually I don't want to be an educational psychologist because I appreciate that they are tied by local authority budgets and
Yeah.
legislations that are not always have the they don't always have the child's interests.
Yeah, definitely. I relate with the teaching. It's like I love what I do and I love supporting, but I can't always be in that mainstream position because of the restrictions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
Sometimes you know that there's things that the best needs of the child, but your hands are tied.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to do that. But because of my experience, and the fact I actually really liked the research, I've always researched autism all
Yeah.
the
Always had
way.
that kind of interest.
Yeah. And I thought, well, you know what, actually what I'd like to do is research and help inform
Yeah.
the next kind of generation of clinical
Brilliant.
psychologists, educational psychologists, and lecture
Yeah.
to kind of to teach them to do a little bit better.
Yeah.
So informing in that way rather than become an educational psychologist myself.
Bad. I mean, this is what we need. The more kind of people that are on the ground and like sharing what they know and aiming to kind of, like you say, bring up that future generation so that they can be the best that they can be, and also
Yeah.
look after us when we're in our old biddy homes. we need solid future generation. um, so one of the things I am so keen to hear about is this double empathy theory.
Yeah.
You mentioned it when we had a quick chat, so if you could kind of explain it for our viewers to get their heads around, that would be really helpful.
So I really love the double empathy theory because I think it's the first theory that I've ever known.
Mm.
It doesn't just it's not a medical model point of view. It's coming from this neurodivergent movement that
Okay.
is really taking off as a result of autistic people banding together and pushing and saying, stop treating us like we're puzzle pieces or
Yeah.
we're anything to fix. So the double empathy problem has basically used tasks where we gather videos of autistic people and non-autistic people communicating. We then ask people to rate those social interactions based on how readable they think they are. So kind of the non-verbal communication, the facial expressions, head movements, those kinds of things. And then I'm really sorry, my dog's going to bark. That they get so how likable they are,
Yeah.
how readable they are, how much you'd like to communicate with this person.
Okay.
So
So
this
these
is done
these are
blind.
interactions going on with two autistic people and two non-autistic people, and then people are watching these interactions, or
Not necessarily. So it depends on the task.
okay.
So sometimes it's just there are neurotypical people and a researcher, and the reactions
Yeah.
of both of those people to certain events. So they could be told a joke, they could be praised, a video recorded.
Okay.
We then take those videos to neurotypical people and autistic people and say, okay, how much can you read this person? How much do you like this person? How much do you want to interact with this person? And we didn't tell anybody. I say we, I didn't do this part. And they were not told that there were autistic people within this group, but they disproportionately rated autistic people as less readable, less likable, less attractive, and said that they didn't want to communicate with these people.
Okay.
Without even knowing, they completely separated the autistic people and the non-autistic people. Autistic people didn't do that. Only neurotypical people did. So what that's telling us is that where neurotypical people think autistic people don't know how to communicate with me, they don't understand my emotions, they don't understand my facial expressions. Actually, neurotypical people are no better at understanding the communication styles of autistic people.
Wow.
I really like this idea that actually it's a two-way communication issue. It's not just that autistic people can't socially communicate, it's that autistic people can't socially communicate with neurotypical people.
I mean, like you say, that's quite mind-blowing, isn't it? Because initially when you say that that people disproportionately noticed, as it were, that there was differences in these kind of people, for me that it makes me feel quite valid. For all those people that have gone, oh, you know, this doesn't exist or that doesn't exist, it makes me feel quite like, well, clearly something does, else how would they have even kind of separated those people? But then you come to the point where you say that actually it's almost highlighting that the problem is with the neurotypical people. So almost what we're seeing is that neurotypical, those without any divergency, are the ones that are quite restricted. They're the ones that have got these.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot more work that needs to be done on this theory. I love this theory. It is partially the basis of my thesis. Although we're looking at it slightly differently. But I think that there's a lot more we could know about this. So does the double empathy problem translate in ADHD? Does it translate in Tourette's syndrome? There's lots of different ways that we could look at this. But I love the fact that for the first time ever, we're not looking at it from a medical point of view and saying, we need to fix autistic people can't socially communicate and we need to fix that.
They
can, you know, that they do show non-verbal behaviors. It's just perhaps a little bit slower. And actually it's the way that we, or I as a neurotypical person, are perceiving that. It isn't the fact that they can't do it, it's how I'm reading them. So it's almost, you know, like the theory of mind theory around autism.
That's what mind blindness is, it? That kind of
that kind of mind blindness. But it's saying that actually it's two-way.
That actually it's not it's not the autistic person's problem, it's all of how we're reading each other. I think that's such an important point to raise when it's Autism Acceptance Week this week. So it's all about kind of supporting the view that we need autism in society, and that this divergency is not just welcome, it's necessary for a human race to kind of progress. So I just think the fact that there's theories now and then there's scientific evidence to start backing it up that it's not an autistic problem, you know, it's our problem, it's everyone's problem.
It is. I think it's been a long time coming, and hats off to you know, the autistic population for not laying down anymore and just taking this, you know, deficit-based model and standing up and saying, actually, no.
We've not got flaws and we've not got like
because they really pushed this movement. And it's I went to a conference a couple of weeks ago, and it's really picking up momentum, and we're seeing now a lot more collaborative work being done. So a lot more autistic or neurodivergent people researching neurodivergence, or
Yeah.
people experience like me with my son,
Mm-hmm.
or in collaboration with, or autistic people or whoever it is that you're researching.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it's baffling that it hasn't
But it
always
hasn't
been
happened.
that way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the questions that I inspire the parents that I'm working with to ask is, when you're given some kind of feedback or your educational healthcare plan and things like that, to actually ask the question, how many neurodivergents were consulted in this process? You know, how many ADHD or autistic adults had some kind of opinion form in this? Because half the problem is, it's almost like dogs deciding the rules for cats. It's like, you know, there's similarities between dogs and cats. They can live together. You know, they've both got fur, they've both got four legs, you know, both got similar senses, but you do treat them differently because they're slightly different. Or maybe you could take it even further and say different breeds of dogs, you know, that you won't treat a small dog the same way you treat a big one. And it's like, just because we're the human race, it's not one size fits all, is it?
Absolutely. And I find that a lot of these professionals are still making very stereotypical based recommendations. So autism, the first thing is obviously, well, let's put a visual timetable in place and everything's going to be
God, the amount of times I've heard that.
and you just roll your eyes, don't
Yeah.
you? There's no
Social stories.
individualization there. Yeah, there's no individualization there
Yeah.
whatsoever. And I think the more we embrace the spectrum aspects of autism, the more we can start pushing towards these individualized plans. And if you ever done kind of an employment, I know these are used in employment a lot, the spiky profiles.
Well, we talk about them having, the students having spiky profiles in terms of their skills.
Yeah, and I think, you know what, wouldn't that just be a better way to say, okay, this person is autistic, but let's do them a spiky profile.
Yeah.
And these are the things they're really good at.
Yeah.
And these are the things that perhaps they struggle with a little bit more. So what can we put in place to help make that a little bit easier?
Yeah.
Not change them, not cure them, but how can we make this a little bit easier for
Because
them?
we all regardless need help to make something easier, you know. It's not about being.
And if it is social communication, it might be talking to the people around that person and bringing up things like double empathy problem and saying, well, actually, have you thought about the way that you're communicating with this person, or how you're perceiving how they're communicating? You know, we know that autistic people can use tone and pitch differently in their voice. So, you know, you're perceiving somebody as being aggressive because you're looking at things from a neurotypical point of view, but actually they may not be. It might just be this disconnection. So it might, you know, I think if we looked at things from more of a spiky profile point of view, but then informed the people around that person to also think about their behavior.
Yeah, of course.
Then we're going to have a nicer society.
It's raising awareness within neurotypicals as well, isn't it? That you're not right just because you have not got recognized issues in these areas doesn't mean that you're the carbon copy of what's perfect and we've all got to fit in around you.
Absolutely. And I think it's a hot topic at the minute, autism and mental health, and as it should be. We know that autistic people
much more likely to
unfortunately suffer from need a mental health diagnosis for lots and lots of different reasons. But for one of those reasons is that neurotypical people are encouraging autistic people to hide their autism, mask it, don't stare, don't show when you find
don't
it
act weird in front of people, that kind of attitude.
Look more neurotypical.
Yeah.
And then we're very surprised when they struggle with this, and then health suffers as a result. I
mean, we said about masking when we spoke before, didn't we, that masking is recognized as almost kind of one of the biggest risk factors of autism, because if you're spending a lot of time masking who you are, then that's what causes the mental health issues, and the mental health issues are what are dangerous. You know, autism itself isn't dangerous, but the kind of the impacts it can have.
Yeah, and just I can't imagine how, I mean, we're all social chameleons. The way that I socially interact here is very different to the way that I socially interact with my friends at the pub or with my children. But I think it's the need and the cognitive burden of I have to do this to get through the day. It must be exhausting.
Definitely. I mean, you know, these teacher strikes that we've had recently. I went to see a student a couple of weeks ago, and she'd been off in the day on a teacher strike. And usually she's quite glum by the time I get to her, kind of wiped, you know, exhausted. She's been at school all day. But walking in, I mean, she was so hyper. She gave me this big smile, and she was chat, 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 chat. And I said to her, Mum, can you see the difference? Because she hasn't had to mask all day. And her mum was like, oh my God, is that what it is? I wondered why she was so hyper. And I was like, yeah, because she hasn't had all her energy drained, kind of thing. And yeah, it was an eye-opener even for me to see how different she is when she's had a day at school type thing. It just reminds you that, like you say, it takes all of that extra, which kind of leads us nicely to the girl thing as well, that girls.
Yeah, I mean, girls are masking more, because there's just so much more pressure on girls. And I have 3 boys. I know that there's a lot of pressure on boys, but we've always known there's a lot more pressure on girls to look a certain way, to weigh a certain weight, you know, everything about being a girl is just it's just so pressurized, especially in formative years. This starts pretty early with girls. And they mask more, but then that stops them getting a diagnosis, because they're masking, because they're hiding. It's not that they're autistic, they've just got really, really good at hiding. I watched that Chris Packham documentary a few weeks ago.
Absolutely brilliant.
It was fantastic. But that first woman, and she video for her mum, it was so emotional.
I cried a lot doing that thing. I think because I related to their struggles, and it's just so heartbreaking that there's so many of us that have kind of gone through that. And you don't really realize till you start to explore it, and then you start to think, oh my goodness, that makes sense, that all adds up and it all ties together. And then it's a little bit, you know, like heartbreaking, because you think, oh, I could have had that support, or I could have, you know, perhaps had a different direction.
But it's so hidden. I see a lot of people, and I'm a big advocate on social media around autism and autism awareness and ADHD and things like that, and mental health, because my experiences with my son, who's also had a lot of mental health issues. And you get people, you get the comments, you get the, oh, we already know about this, we already know about autism. Like, God, everyone knows someone who's autistic, or everyone's a little bit autistic. That drives me insane. But
there can't be enough awareness. We know that, you know. It's like,
actually, you don't know, because you don't. Yeah, you know that autistic people need a routine, or you think Rain Man. They're very stereotypical of autism. It isn't mental health. It isn't masking. It isn't anything that actually is really important in autism that these people know. But they're the first ones to say, oh, we don't need this, we already know.
There was an article released a couple of weeks ago, or maybe even months ago now, and it was slating ADHD, adult ADHD, and questioning it. And he highlighted that this doctor had said, every time I see there's another awareness day, my heart sinks. We don't need more awareness days. And they were kind of saying they were worried about the pressure that's on the healthcare system. So I suppose they're worried that the more awareness, the more people realise, the more people turn to the healthcare system. So I understand that. But for me, the awareness raising is about actually empowering your own life, the people around you. It's the more aware you are, the better you can treat your friends, your family. You know, why would you not want that? Why would you not want to be the best that you can be, kind of thing?
I mean, I heard some really scary statistics at this conference, and don't quote me, I could be
I always kind of
slightly out here. But I mean, this is filmed, do quote me, but the actual numbers could be slightly different.
Yeah.
So, and it was around ADHD, and they
Mhm.
said that a child diagnosed with ADHD who is on medication from the age of 6 to 18 costs something like £900,000.
No, I know where you're going with
Somebody undiagnosed with
Mhm.
ADHD in benefits, in job seekers,
Accidents.
because they can't keep down a job,
Yeah.
in the prison system, in so
Health.
many different areas, costs the government, or cost the country on average, is at £1.2 million per person,
Yeah. And
through being undiagnosed and being unsupported.
yeah.
It just shows that diagnosis is helpful.
Yeah, exactly. And like in the whole argument of medication, but actually the ADHD meds are one of the cheapest ones to produce. And like you say, they've got genuine positive effects,
Yeah,
and it affects the purse strings like in a positive way.
really
So
does. And I when I was there as well, I found that, is it in Sweden, where if a child is removed from a classroom 2 times for any reason, they are given a whole battery of tests,
to see why.
like dyslexia,
Yeah,
dyscalculia,
is there a reason behind
dyspraxia,
it?
ADHD, and
Yeah,
things,
and
rather
their eyes
than,
are open to it.
yeah,
It's like prevention's better than cure. You know, if we could get this while it's young, we're not going to have adults committing suicide and dying young, because they're going to already have had the input that they needed whilst they were younger. But
yeah,
we are caught in this kind of trauma cycle. So a lot of there's a lot of hereditary evidence that it's hereditary, and that autism and ADHD runs in families. And certainly when I look at my family, it's almost, when I start to trace it back, I'm like, wow, it's no wonder that I've got all of the genes that I've got, because you can see it in the family coming through both sides. And sorry, I just brain injured myself then by going off topic slightly. Like, what was I going on about? That was it. I know that was it. I know. Come back. It's the trauma cycle thing. So growing up yourself, masking and trying to, bat off all these, I'm not different, it's nothing wrong with me, it's your problem. Then you put that onto your children. The children have also got the same problems. You're determined they're not going to have the same problems, but they have got them. And the cycle continues. And I'm determined, one of the things I'm determined, we're breaking that. This is the generation that is breaking those trauma cycles. We're not going to repeat those systems anymore.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, with my son, he has ADHD, he has autism, but actually what's caused his mental health difficulties, and it's his mental health difficulties that are the hardest thing to deal with. It's not his autism, it's not his ADHD. That just is who he is and how he is. But his mental health has come from trauma. It's come from people not knowing, not understanding his communication styles, not knowing and understanding him. And it's that we need to break. Autistic people are not this horrible, awful drain on society at all. It's the trauma that they go through. And I get really frustrated, because I often read in my son's reports and in lots of different things around resilience. Autistic people need to be more resilient. I think that is the biggest load of nonsense I've ever heard. They are the most resilient people I've ever met.
Yeah, because they've already been through, they've had to advocate for their own needs and their self for so long that they're probably, in a way, what we need to be doing is softening them up, giving them a bit of nurture. And it's okay, let your guard down, not build more resilience. become even more toxic independent.
What these people are talking about when they talk about resilience is looking less autistic.
Or more. Don't respond to our neurotypical ways, basically, is what they're saying. Like,
we know that you're overwhelmed in your senses and everything else, but just ignore all of that. It doesn't matter. It's fine. Be more resilient.
One of the best things I ever read was, before I discipline a student, I will always find out if their needs were being met at the time. So when it's a behavioural kind of incident, and because I'm with students that are quite difficult all of the time, so the behaviour needs are happening all of the time. But it's such a good reminder to think, well, actually, you know, is that clock ticking bothering them, and, you know, and all of those things, because actually, is it behavior, or is it in fact an indicator that something else needs to change? And that's usually the case. And we're the adults, we're the teachers, we're the, you know, we're the people that are supposed to be looking for the answers, and if we don't know them, find them. One final thing I want to raise, I'm not sure if and when the recording's going to cut out, is I was reading some stuff last night, because after our initial kind of conversation, and I don't want to share it on the platform without getting your input. So it basically said that girls were better at social. Autistic girls tend to show better socializing skills than autistic boys, and that is why they mask better. But I was like, is that a bit of a chicken and an egg scenario? Because are we just masking that we've got better social skills? Is it, you know, or if we have genuinely got better social skills, then it's not masking, is it? It's just that you're not recognizing it the same way you recognize it in boys. So for me, I was like, I really want to share this kind of suggestion, but on the other hand, is it just another kind of neurotypical excuse?
I think that that's really tough. I mean, it's not something that I have come across in my literature. I think what we have to remember when we read these things is that autism in girls is quite a new thing. We had a lot of male theories around autism for a very long time, which meant only very low functioning, if you like, girls were being
the ones that were really obvious, you mean? Like,
they were the ones that were being diagnosed for a long time. So
there was kind of no mild.
So any research that you see on girls will tend to have very low participatory numbers, that they'll tend to focus on more high functioning, for want of a better word, girls. And I think you're right. I think it's a chicken and egg. I think girls are better at masking, but also I think that there is a difference in how men and women communicate anyway. So depending on the age that they were when this data was taken, I have 3 teenage boys, and I know that trying to communicate with 3 teenage boys is very different to how you communicate with teenage girls. So I think I would be wary,
reluctant, to kind of I thought as much, and
I'm not certain. I've not read this paper myself.
Well, no, but I thought it's very hard to say girls are better at masking, girls are better at social scenarios, because I thought we're kind of almost adding even more stereotypes into it if we just go with that.
Well, one's a byproduct of the other. If they're better at masking, I did, well then of course it's going to look like.
I think that's what my brain did. It thought about it, thought, oh wow, this is a really good point to raise, then overthought it and thought, oh my god, I think that it's a rubbish point. That's on the complete opposite. I think I'll still raise it, but with more of a suggestion that, you know, girls do look, it does look different in girls, and they will mask it, and their abilities will be different. But what you just said about girls and boys and men and women communicating differently, we did a podcast, our first one was a Valentine's special, and we spoke about ADHD and autism within relationships. Now, one of my kind of off the record type theories is that an ADHD person will attract an autistic, or predominantly ADHD attract a predominantly autistic neurodivergent. And I'm going off a lot of kind of just my experience, friends, things that I see around me. But so not only then have you got that barrier of maybe one of you being ADHD and one being autistic, but you've also got, just in general, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, that, you know, we're emotionally led and kind of empowered by how we felt, and, you know, go along that, whereas men are a little bit more action based. It's kind of like, well, do this, just do this, no emotion attached to it. But so I think it's worthwhile remembering that. Sorry, I've just had a think of what's saying.
We've got 10 minutes left. We've got 10 minutes.
Is that what it's a 10-minute thing?
I'm not, my current thesis is around online interactions, because thanks to COVID, the way that we're interacting is moving online a lot. And whether or not this double empathy problem that we see, this disconnection is there online, and kind of the mechanisms behind that. So
Do you think online chat's really helpful though for the autistic community, because you can get into
So
the whole...
the initial findings that like my wonderful supervisors have done, and we're taking this data and running with it in very complicated ways, that actually this disconnection isn't apparent online. So that would put autistic people on at least an equal footing when they communicate with neurotypical people online. And as you can imagine the practical implications that will have if we can carry on and you know, replicate this. And there's lots of research being done on it at the minute that it looks like online communication could...
Is this typing, or is this kind of online communication?
Kind of online interaction.
So do you think the screen just provides a safety net almost?
I don't know, that we're really trying to unpick this data.
Yeah.
And it is very, very complicated data. So I don't like... I've had a full day in unit today, and I don't...
Yeah, like, we'll save it for another time.
Today, but it is really, really interesting that actually, you know, there may be differences in the way that we communicate online and in person, and that maybe neurotypical people like view things a little bit differently online. Maybe we look for different things online than we do in
more structured online. Maybe there's less room for kind of, because I know that one of the things I struggle with is turn taking. You know, being ADHD, I'm like interrupting all the time, kind of desperate to get my point in there. So it's like, and will fail to read the clues of the people getting annoyed by it. But online, I'm so much more aware of myself. Like, I will wait, and it really reminds me to wait for my turn and stuff like that. So I wonder whether, you know, the structure helps. There's rules. It's a little bit more back and forth and less kind of areas for these unwritten signs, like these invisible signs kind of thing.
Well, watch this space.
Yeah,
because we're going to have some data. We have data, and we are analysing it. And we're going to be doing, I think we have 2 to 3 more studies that we're going to be doing just as part of this PhD. But Nottingham have an autism research team. If anyone is interested in taking part in any research or just wants to see what they're doing, they are on Twitter. And you know, things are regularly getting published on there, or there's often calls for people to participate in research, because obviously the more autistic people we have that will take part in research, the more we can, you know, the more we find out about all of these things. And
definitely, I'll put a link.
Practical applications.
When I share the video, I'll put a link into the info or the comments about the Nottingham research team, and then if anybody is interested, because obviously, like I say, the more diversity of genders and ages and things that you, and where you are on the spectrum, the better. So before we wrap up, I shared a post last night that kind of tried to explain the whole, is everyone on the autism spectrum? So obviously you mentioned it briefly this morning that people, everyone's a little bit autistic. And what I've tried to show in this post is that everybody can be plotted on a spectrum of life, of being human kind of thing, and that most people would fall within a typical range on that spectrum, and that when you fall outside of those typical ranges, that's when, you know, you might be classed as autistic or ADHD or disabled, depending on which areas it is that you fall outside of the expected range. So technically, everyone could be plotted on the autistic spectrum, but they wouldn't all be autistic. So, you know, it's like, we can get a spectrum, you can plot yourself on it, and you might find that you've got autistic tendencies in some of the areas, and you might find that, you know, you can relate to those difficulties, and you might find that you completely not got any diversity in any of those. You know, you're basically what we would expect in those areas, in which case you wouldn't be classed as autistic. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, because I know that in our podcast as well, which we're supposed to launch tonight, but it's coming out in the morning due to technical issues, the parent that we had on, she actually said, well, I think everybody is autistic. Well, and she's a parent of autistic kids, so you know, she's done research and stuff like that. But I think that for me, when people say everyone's autistic or everyone's ADHD, that just highlights how much you personally relate to it. It's like, it's easy to think everyone is when you're like, well, I feel like that, and my kids feel like that, and you know, my partner feels like that, and it's like, yeah, because perhaps you're all on that spectrum somewhere, you know.
I think that when people say that, it kind of minimizes the struggle,
isn't it? Yeah,
that people face. And I mean, I can say I have certain sensory issues.
yes,
I'm not necessarily comfortable in socially communicating in certain,
you'd be on that spectrum somewhere, perhaps not very
extreme. It doesn't
extreme.
mean that I'm autistic, because that's normal. It's normal that you don't feel comfortable interacting in every single scenario. It's normal that some sounds or smells or tastes are going to really bother you. It doesn't mean you've got the sensory issues.
Yeah.
The point of, you know, it becoming an issue, I think the difference is that if you can have these little issues and get on with life completely normally,
that's the difference.
You don't need a diagnosis, but it's where it tips over into the fact that this is impacting your daily life and making your daily life really tough.
If it's consistent and it's having impact, and
I think that is the difference. But I think from my point of view of a mum, and from what I know in what I've learned, I do think that when people say that, it really does minimize sometimes that people have. You know, everyone can be you can be chirpy and bouncy, doesn't mean you've got ADHD.
That's the thing.
You know, everyone can get distracted by their mobile phones. It doesn't mean that they're having attentive ADHD. That is just within a normal range of. We all get distracted, we all get a bit hyper, we all get tongue-tied, we all have things that we don't like. We all like a routine. But it doesn't mean that we're autistic or we have ADHD or.
That's exactly the, you know, what the kind of point that we want to raise, though, that it's autistic people and ADHD people, they've not got abnormal traits, have they? It's normal stuff, just to the extreme, and that's why we can all relate to it, regardless of if we are actually, you know, classed as kind of ADHD or autistic. And I mean, the reason the parent that said that comment, and the reason I'm bringing it up is because her daughter is very affected by her autism. She's non-verbal, she's 50, and so the mum knows how impactful autism is, because, you know, she's there for her daughter. But I think for me, it's definitely when people say to me, oh, everyone's ADHD, because I get that loads, obviously, because I talk about ADHD quite a lot. Everyone's ADHD. The main majority of people that have said that to me, I'm like, you might be, but not everyone is. And it really is like, if, you know, those people that see it as totally normal are usually the people that have got the really strong traits. And it's like, that's why they see it as totally normal. And it's like, actually, not everybody has got those problems or difficulties or struggles. So, you know, but there we go. So we're down to our last minute. That means the meeting's just going to cut out any point. Well, thank you so much for talking to me, and we'll definitely get you onto the podcast to kind of develop a little bit on the points and to hear about your research and where it goes. And even if the specific people you want to kind of, if you need to do a call to action to get the research done, we can hopefully help you there. But thank you so much for sharing your views, and I hope that people have gained some insight from it.
No, thank you for listening.
No problem. I'm going to press stop on the stop video on the recording.